This is an interview with Walter Kirwin, who until recently was head of the Volunteer Center of Los Angeles. The interviewer is Horace Sheldon. So we'll proceed from here, hearing about Mr. Kirwin and how he came to occupy this important role in Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Walter Kirwin.
Thank you. First of all, let me say it's an honor for me to be asked to do this. I hope that the information that I can provide will be something that is valuable to you all.
Just stop a minute. I want to be sure. Now you got to record. Okay, go ahead.
We're back on.
Right, back on.
Well, as I said, I was born in New York City. Spent my early years in the suburbs of New York. I went to Iona College in New Rochelle, graduated in 1960, and entered the Marine Corps, spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. And then when I got out in 1964, I joined what was then the Atlantic Refining Company in Philadelphia, one of the companies that I had written to while I was in the service. So I went to work in the city of Philadelphia. Several years later, there was a merger between the Atlantic Refining Company and Richfield Oil Corporation, and that's what brought me to the West Coast. The headquarters was moved from the east to Los Angeles, and I moved along with the organization. The early part of my career, I spent 31 years with ARCO. The first half of my career was in retail marketing, and then several years after I came out here, I had the opportunity to go into public relations. And during the time that I was in public relations, I had the title of Manager of External Affairs. And in that capacity, I headed up and helped put together, along with my staff, the ARCO's volunteer employee program, which turned out to be a real model of corporate volunteerism in the community. I think that part of the reason for that is that certainly my staff had it organized very well. There was recognition, there was interesting activities. We adopted the first school in the Los Angeles Unified School District, which again was a model. We had lots of employees who took time off from their work to go and work with the kids in the school. Subsequent to that, there were other activities that the volunteers got involved in, but there were several thousand employees involved in that project. And
Obviously a real model of corporate involvement in the community.
It really was. It really was. And I think that the reason for that was, or the biggest part of the reason for that was it had the support of management. Robert Anderson, who at the time was the president of ARCO, or the chairman of ARCO, and Thornton Bradshaw, who was the president, were really very supportive of all these activities. And that really, really goes a long way when you see these men involved in the community, that the employees say, well, I want to do these things too. And following their example, Rod Cook, who was the president, was involved with junior achievement, and another individual who gave a lot of support and encouragement to employees to participate in activities outside the office. And I think that one of the benefits to the employees was that many of us got a chance to leave our workspace and travel for the company and get out and see new things, but a lot of employees didn't get that opportunity. But this period of time during the week when they were able to leave their workspace and go out and do something entirely different, I've had many supervisors tell me that they had their employees who were involved in the program came back with just a lot more enthusiasm for their job.
Now, this is very impressive in terms of corporate involvement. You mean ARCO set up an arrangement in which an individual employee would, in effect, take time off from his regular duties to devote himself to a volunteer?
That's correct. That's correct. There were a certain number of hours, and this goes back a little bit, but I'm going to say several hours a month, at least an hour a week. A lot of them would do it on their lunch hour. They'd go down to the school from 11 o'clock until about 1 o'clock, and wouldn't take their lunch hour, just to do it. But this was a release time activity that had the blessing of management, and it really was it worked out very well. One of the other things that we were able to do that was helpful, that an employee who spent a certain number of hours a month was able to get money from the foundation that would match his hours. Now, they had a program where employees would get a matching grant if they gave $1,000 to their school or a church, whatever, not a church, but organization that they volunteered for, they'd get a matching grant. But this was the first time, in my knowledge, that there was a monetary award to an organization for an employee's time. And it was a certain minimum hours, and I forget what that was. It might have been 5, 10 hours a month, I'm not sure. But there was a criteria. It had to be certified in writing by the organization.
Wow.
So that was very helpful.
That's very impressive.
It was really an excellent program. We had a lot of support from management, and a lot of money was put into the program. I think that one of the reasons that this was done was because Robert Anderson and Thornton Bradshaw felt that it was a way to get foundation money into the community in a way that you couldn't do otherwise. In other words, if the employee was involved in a project, not necessarily that school, because there were other projects they were involved in all across the country. That was one way to get money into those organizations that wouldn't have been possible just doing a direct grant from the foundation. The recognition program was very good too. We had dinners.
Tell us about that, the recognition program.
Well, each one of the subsidiary companies would have their own recognition luncheon. The volunteers would be recognized through a vote from community leaders. And then each one of those subsidiary companies, of which there were 8 or 10, the winners from those organizations would be invited to Los Angeles, bring their spouse, have a big dinner here with the chairman. Wow. And it was really make this silver bowl or whatever the thing was that we were giving them. But it was a recognition that ARCO recognized their contribution to the community. And I don't know if it's still, of course, with the acquisition of British Petroleum, and those things don't exist anymore, but for a while, I know.
I was going to ask you what happened to that program.
At certain levels, there was a requirement that management people would be involved in community affairs as part of their performance analysis.
Ah, right.
And that was somebody who I don't know if you know about, who put that, who was instrumental in getting that done. Have you heard of Ruth March?
No.
Well, Ruth was a citizen of Los Angeles who had a lot to do with volunteerism. And one of the things she also did was she actually got the United Nations to do this International Year of the Volunteer, although she didn't know it at the time and has since passed away. But you might want to take a look at the library at the USC School of Social Work, because the archives there have her materials about this program.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I had it at the Volunteer Center, and I said, look, this is going...
And these archives that this tape is going to go.
Okay, well, if you look down there, you'll find these books and talk about her involvement and what she did to promote volunteerism. And I understand from the brief reading I did of it that she was instrumental in getting corporations to have volunteer activity on the part of the employees as part of their performance review. So you might want to take a look at
Great,
it.
yes.
Her name was Ruth March.
Ruth March.
Yeah, in fact, she's going to be honored at an upcoming event, and I don't know what the date is. If I can find out and let you know. And evidently she has a sister here that's going to accept the award.
Ah.
They're going to give her a wood posthumous award.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a brief history of my activities at ARCO, and that program lasted. It was still in effect. I retired in 1995, and it was still a very strong program then. I think that
I've lost track of what happened, but British Petroleum merged or took over.
Yeah,
or
it was really a takeover.
Yeah.
The problem at the time was ARCO was very dependent on the price of crude oil for its profitability. Everything else was okay. I mean, they made money a little bit here, a little bit there. You lose a little bit here, a little bit. Pipelines, transportation, retail. But the real crux of the problem was the low price of crude, and there just was not enough there to sustain the organization. So Mike Boland, who was then the then president, let it be known that he thought it would be a good idea if somebody came in and took over. It would be lucrative. And I guess British Petroleum was one of the organizations that looked at it, and they had previously acquired Amoco.
Yes.
And BP was the partner with ARCO at the Prudhoe Bay field.
Ah,
so there was an association there that familiarity that made it work, I guess.
Sure.
So they've taken over, but the sad thing is, as with other organizations whose headquarters are no longer in Los Angeles, there's not too much interest on the part of the company
That's happened so often.
Yeah, I don't want to disparage them. I mean, BP is headquartered in London, but organizations like Bank of America, headquartered in San Francisco, and other organizations that have left. ARCO was the last Fortune 500 company that was headquartered in Los Angeles. Now there are no more.
Is that right?
So. With that went the foundation.
Yeah.
There's no more ARCO Foundation. At one time, the ARCO Foundation, and I don't know if this number is right, but I believe that it was responsible for grants totaling. The budget was about $30 million. Well, that's a lot of money, and it's no longer there. Because British Petroleum's interest now is other places. Now, they may still do some things here, and I don't want to disparage them by any means, because they may do some good things. I think they support the Music Center and some other things, but the kinds of things that a local organization, a locally based organization, can do are not going to get done.
I know exactly what you mean. From my background at Ford, we had an active community relations program. We did a little bit of the kind of thing you're talking about in terms of recognizing civic participation by our people. We had a community service awards program we gave out called the Bell Ringer program. We had a handsome bell that was presented to the winners in the major Ford communities where we had plants around the country. So, corporate involvement can be very important, and it's missed when it no longer.
I think the Ford Foundation still supports the Points of Light.
Could be.
I think they still, if they're not on the board, I think that they have grants that support programs that Points of Light puts on.
I see. Well, that would make sense. I wouldn't be surprised at that. Now, at some point, as you said, you retired when in 19...
I retired in February of 1995.
All right.
And I was sort of looking for something, but one thing I knew, I didn't want to come back downtown. I had been driving downtown for over 20 years, and I said, I'm going to get off that freeway. So one day I got a call. The director of the Volunteer Center of Los Angeles is retiring, and would you be interested?
Wow.
Absolutely not. I'm not going downtown. So I went, I went to Florida, and I came back, and that's about a month later, I got another phone call from somebody else.
Look, well, you were an obvious person to seek out, that's for sure.
Look, she said to me, look, you got to do this. I said, I don't got to do anything. I'm not coming back downtown. Well, will you do this? There was a health issue with this person. So the person retired. She said, well, we need to look for somebody. Will you come and mind the store for a couple of months? Oh, I said, sure, I'll do that. She said, we'll pay you what we're paying him. Just come in and watch the store. Well, I came into what was a veritable hornet's nest. There had been major money stolen. And I'm not going to mention any names or whatever, but there was a tremendous loss of funds, certain employees involved, and just a total mess that at one point, when I realized that the organization was living off its assets, now the board was aware of this, and they warned me when I came in, but I don't think they realized how bad it was. And it came very close to shutting the doors of an organization that had been in existence since 1946.
Now, okay, that gets to what I was just going to ask you a little bit about the early growth, the origin of the Voluntary Action Center of Los Angeles, way back that
It was
far,
started in 1946, and there were several women involved. I don't know their names, and I don't know that. I think there are probably people around who remember that, but I'm not. And I'll tell you who might, although she doesn't like me too much, is Anita Army. She's on the board of this archives.
Oh, really? She is.
But
Okay.
I think that Anita thought that I was too tough. Well, what happened was that I had, and along with the board and the finance committee, we just had to do something. So I was the 53rd employee, or 52 employees when I got there, and I cut it to 25. And I think that they felt that I shouldn't have done that. I said, well, look, this is a business.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but if you
Sure.
want the organization, this is what's going to have to be done. I have to cut expenses because I need to know, and I was not a financial person. So I just said to the bookkeeper, I want to know what's coming in every month, and I want to know what's going out. And I need to balance that. I need to know.
Now, what was the source of income?
Well, the source of income was government funds from
Yeah.
Corporation for National Service that ran what we call the corporation programs, which were foster grandparents, senior companions,
Right.
RSVP.
Yeah.
Those were government programs.
Right.
But then the core volunteer program was funded by, we got a lot of money from corporations. But we held events,
Yeah.
and there were board members who provided funds.
Sure.
But various sources, let's say, contributions.
Sure.
But what I had to do was balance this, and at the same time try to run an organization that was supposed to serve the community.
Well, then, having started way back in the 1940s with the leadership of these women you mentioned, it continued then on during that long period of time till we came to what I think of as the modern era of coordinated volunteer activity, like in the 60s and 70s and so on. I wonder if in that early period, Los Angeles must have been unusual in having such a coordinated approach, I suppose.
It's my understanding that the Volunteer Center was one of the first in the nation.
Yeah, I would think so.
And this is what I think happened, but I'm not sure. But for what it's worth, the women who started it were the wisest of judges. And what they did was they wanted to start a community service program. Now this is probably years later, but that was part of what the Volunteer Center did. But it was one of the earliest volunteer centers in the country, 1946.
Yeah.
So with the help of the board and the finance committee, this situation straightened itself out and got back on a financial footing that was sound. About 2 years ago, one of the board members from IBM suggested that there were too many volunteer centers in the county of Los Angeles. There were five in the county of Los Angeles.
That's a point I was going to raise with you. So there were 5 centers in outlying areas, plus Los Angeles itself. What did you do? But did you coordinate those or bring them together, or embellish the outlying?
The situation was that it was difficult to do business because nobody knew who was who. The public didn't know the difference between us and the next guy. And there was one in the Valley, there's one in Long Beach,
Sure.
there's one in St. Torrance, there's one in St. Pasadena.
Right.
And we all got along, but we're always stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah.
And the problem was what the IBM guy said, Bill Brown, was, and he was right, we can't be funding all these places. We need a merger to take place.
Yeah.
Well, the merger that took place was between the Volunteer Center of Los Angeles and the Volunteer Center of the Assistance League, which was based in Panorama City. They were really bigger than we were, so it was sort of a takeover. But one of the things it was guaranteed employment pretty much for these people. That was what I was always worried about. Every month,
Sure.
It gets increasingly difficult to raise money, especially with these corporations leaving. I mean, we had many organizations, and to tell you the truth, over a period of time prior to my arrival, there was not the nurturing of the funding sources that there should have been. I mean, if you're an organization that depends on people to give you money, you need to schmooze with them, or you're just not going to get the money. And they ignored the funders.
Well, can't do that. Right.
And the mission kind of got muddied. There are people who say they were too much involvement with the corporate referral program.
I think at some point, maybe right now, we ought to know a little bit for the record about just how the Voluntary Action Center served to stimulate or direct or coordinate volunteer activity. Even after you came in and had to cut the staff so much, you still had a sizable staff. What did all these people do?
Well,
how were you organized?
Each one of the programs had a manager. In other words, the 3 corporation programs, each one of the corporation programs, like foster grandparents, had a manager, and maybe an assistant, depending on how much work there was. In fact, both the foster grandparent program and senior companion program both had two people, and eventually RSVP had 2 people. So there's 6 right there. But then we had outlying offices. We had an office in South Central, office on the West Side, an office in East LA.
But to some extent, then the Voluntary Action Center, or the Volunteer Center, right? The Volunteer Center of Los Angeles, operated certain programs.
Yes.
I see.
And some of these programs, the ones that were operated by these managers in different locations around the city, stimulated the voluntary effort. They each had their own advisory committee, and what they would do is look into opportunities for people to volunteer. In other words, if you walked into the office and said, "I'd like to volunteer," there was a program where you would be given, first of all, you'd be interviewed to find out what your interests were, and then given the opportunity to observe several venues, so that you didn't go to one and say, "Well, I don't like this," and then never come back. If you don't like what you're doing, come back and see us. We'll give you something else.
That gets to exactly what I was curious about. Because back at the early days of the National Center for Voluntary Action, I found that people had, I thought, a mistaken impression that what it was all about was simply recruiting volunteers. And I remember I used to keep harping on the point that, well, yes, we've got to recruit volunteers, but to make it work, we've got to give a lot of attention to structuring programs so that volunteers can be utilized effectively. And we had lots of stories about well-intended, interested people, competent people showing up wherever, some agency wanting to volunteer, and then disappearing into the woodwork because they didn't have any way to connect the individual with an actual going program.
Well, one of the things that we did at the Volunteer Center, we had a training program periodically for nonprofits. How to deal with a volunteer.
Right.
Because they would abuse the volunteer.
Right.
Especially young people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'd have high school students, college students who would come, call us.
Sure.
Gee, I'd like to do something. I do.
All right.
Well, they'd go to some place, they'd hand them a broom.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure.
that's not. You know, you had to nurture the volunteer. You had to give them meaningful activities, or the volunteer experience was going to be poor. So that was one of the things that I think that we really took pride in, was the fact that we were able to create, as you said, a structure, so that the volunteer would feel that they were doing something worthwhile.
All right. In the period so then you served as the head of the Volunteer Center for how long?
I was there exactly 5 years.
5 years. Okay.
I was only going to be there for 2 months.
Yes, I was going to get back to that.
Well,
obviously.
By the time the holidays came, the things were such a mess I couldn't leave. So they said to me, "Would you like to stay?" I said, "Well, I guess I've created such a mess here, but I better stay until it gets straightened out."
It's a rather unusual recruiting technique they used,
Exactly.
but it worked.
Exactly, it worked. Actually, I think they had somebody. They had a couple of people that they were interested in, but they said, "If you want the job, it's yours." I said, "Well, but I want." I'm kind of person who I don't want to leave in the middle of something.
Sure.
I want to get ahead.
Right.
I didn't initially particularly think that this merger was the thing to do, but I went along with it.
Yeah.
I mean, knowing full well I was going to lose my job. I mean, I did lose my job, but there was no role for me anymore.
Yeah.
One of the things I said was, you need to keep the name Volunteer Center of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Because the Volunteer Center with that name. Now the other volunteer centers don't seem to be interested in the merger. But I think a lot of it has to do with individual needs. Board members who don't want to be a part of a larger organization will be against it.
Yeah.
Directors who want to direct their own organization. I mean, I felt that way too. I mean, I was the number 2 person all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. It's different. I got to be able to control things, or I'm not interested in doing it.
Yeah.
At any rate, what happened was, with the help of the board and the finance committee, everything got straightened out. But then we did the merger, and they offered. I was struggling with the commute. I mean, it was an hour and 15 minutes in the morning, an hour and 15 minutes home. I just
wow, that's
hard. So anyway,
that was a real sacrifice on your part.
But I was compensated well. As a matter of fact, the last couple of years I was only working 4 days a week. I took part of my salary to cut.
Yeah.
As part of that cost-cutting thing, I said, well,
see.
I don't need to be here 5 days a week.
Ah.
Once I get the thing straightened out, the thing about it is, it runs itself. You don't need to be. If you need to be there, you got the wrong people.
Yeah.
That's my philosophy.
Sure.
If I can't leave and have things run
Right.
as if I was there, then I got the wrong people there.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but I think one of the things that I was thinking about, I made a speech one time years ago to Dovia, directors of volunteers and agencies. Talked about the changing face of volunteerism.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Tell us a little about that.
It's a lot different than
the
it
changing
was.
face of volunteerism. That's important.
Yeah, it's first of all, it was different in the different cities that we had a person on the west side, person in South Central, person in East LA. Talking about a different population.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I mean, Angela Edwards, who's the director of the West LA, had women in the afternoon who didn't have anything else to do.
Sure.
Traditionally, And I'm not being sexist or racist or anything else.
Sure.
The people in South Central, they don't have the time.
Right.
So you had to create programs for them that they could do maybe as a family. In fact, one of the things that the Kellogg Foundation, I think it was, came up with some funding for a program that we ran called Family Matters that operated out of the sort of the Alvarado neighborhood down here. There's a school down there which is very close to our original offices. And it was getting families together to do volunteer work on the weekend. Because you couldn't do it otherwise. You got mother and father both working.
Yeah.
And then in East LA, the Latino community there is entirely different than it was in South Central. So you had all these different things, and the changing face of the volunteer. It's just very different than it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, even 15 years ago, because of the changing population. And the...
So you're saying that the change was the direct product of the community makeup change, rather than anything intrinsic to the process.
The Hispanic community, I think they make wonderful volunteers, but they volunteered in their own communities back home in a different way than they do here, because of the I don't know whether it's depersonalized in LA. But they would take care of themselves and take care of their families and each other back in what we used to call the old country.
Right.
But here, they were disassociated from the community. And they really didn't feel, or don't feel, as if they have any ownership. And that's a problem, because if you don't feel like you have ownership, and this is only my opinion, but it's an opinion that's based upon observation and what I think is true, that they didn't feel that they needed to participate in any community activities or help the community in any way. On the other hand, if one of their neighbors needed something, no question that they would babysit or do whatever, but not a combined effort. So this Kellogg Foundation funding for the Family Matters program is still going on, and it was really wonderful. We had at one time about 100 families that were involved doing projects on weekends.
Yeah.
So that's different. The other difference is that people don't have as much free time as they once had. They're a lot of work.
I believe that is a fundamental fact of life these days. People are so busy with everything. I think a big change in our society started at the end of World War II. So many women going into the workforce for the first time. And the war ended, and of course there was a process of women being attracted to the experience they had working, whether they were Rosie the Riveter or working as a file clerk or whatever.
But they were out of the house.
And they were out of the house, and I remember discussing this with some people a long time ago. I was making the point that this process of more women getting involved in the workplace was going to mushroom build on itself, because if Sally Smith next door is working and earning enough money to supplement the family income appreciably, the lady down the street may be under pressure to do the same thing, gradually over time. Of course, all that happened.
Sure.
And I think society pays a price for that because people are so busy with their workaday lives. Something's got to give.
And the other myth was that with the baby boomers are going to be retiring, taking early retirement.
Yeah.
And they'll be available for volunteer activities.
Right.
Not true.
Not true.
Because they didn't save any money, so they can't retire.
That is an absolute fact.
They got to work.
Yeah.
I know people who my age had said, I can't retire. I don't have any money.
Right.
My wife's working, I'm working,
right.
And they don't have time to volunteer.
You got to keep on working as long as they can.
Yeah, they work. They'll always work.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of forces that are acting against the volunteer effort.
That's a fundamental fact. It's too bad.
And it's too bad that I think that the corporate volunteer programs, there are some, but I don't think there are as many as there should be, because I'm a believer that the business corporations of whatever size are members of the community and need to give back to the community. And one of the ways they can give back to the community, if they don't give funding, I mean, many organizations can't afford to give funding, but they can work in schools. They can let their employees work in schools.
Sure.
And as I said earlier on, there's a tremendous advantage that companies don't take advantage of this opportunity to give their employees an opportunity to do something that's going to make them feel better not only about themselves, but about the kind of job that they have to do every day.
I think that is the way it works in a company that is intelligent about it and has a view toward understanding the corporate responsibility in the company. We always preached that at Ford, and it worked up to a point, but always shortcomings, of course.
And there's many ways you can do it too. We had different programs. People would come to us and say, "Well, we'd like to do something. We don't know what to do." So we have a smorgasbord of activities.
Right.
What you need to do is go back and ask your employees what they want to do.
What they want to do.
Let them vote, and then when they tell you what they want to do, then come back to us and we'll set it up. We'll make arrangements
rather than
box lunches.
Dictate from the top down.
Exactly.
Here's what we want our guys to do. Right.
And that's one of the things at ARCO that was never done. I mean, whatever you did was fine. I mean, there were certain things that. Religious things that you couldn't get involved in for any monetary. I mean, if you wanted to, that's fine.
Yeah.
It probably wasn't going to be as significant as if you did something else, because a lot of people work for the churches. That's a different thing.
Sure.
They certainly weren't going to get any funding for it because the foundation had rules and regulations about what they would fund, wouldn't fund.
All right.
So,
all right.
But yeah, you can't dictate to what they want to do. Although when we did it. We had the opportunity to go down to that school, but we did it because we heard about it from USC.
From USC.
From USC. USC had a program called I'm not going to remember the name, the Joint Education Project, and it was being run from the campus, and it was to get students into the classroom to work with elementary school kids. So we said, well, if students can do it, what can't adults do? So we patterned it after that. We didn't think it up, but we patterned it after that.
Well, USC now has a 5 schools program.
Do they?
Working very actively with 5 schools in the general community of the campus there. And they involve the faculty and all kinds of people.
From the school social work?
From the school. Well, the school social work is involved, but it's broader than that. It's under the auspices of their senior vice president for external affairs. She set it up.
I used to get. I chaired the board of counselors for a number of years. I don't know if Francis told you.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Oh, of the school social work? Oh, is that right?
During Dean Patty's.
Ah, right. Sure, I know Reno well. Yeah.
I used to tell him, you need to get the faculty out into the community here. You got a community that's isolated from the school.
Right.
You got to get out. So he said, well, what are we going to do? And we talked about it. And they finally did some things. But I was always on him for that.
I didn't realize that. So you were the chair of the board of counselors. Yeah, Maryland's got a board of counselors. I've gone to their meetings a couple of times.
I stopped. I had to leave while I was on there. I think they wanted me off. I'd been on too long. I did it for about 3 years.
Yeah.
But then when I left ARCO and got involved with the Volunteer Center, I really didn't have the time.
Sure. So when you were in ARCO was when you became chair of the board of counselors?
Yeah, it was probably, I was going to say probably 1990,
to 93, something like that. I can't remember the years, but it was around then.
Well, your activity adds up to a model for what people ought to do.
Well, I was telling somebody this morning, I said, I don't know why they want to interview me. There's a lot of people that know more about volunteerism than I do.
Well, I think you're contributing a wealth of observations here. What can be done, Walter, about this problem you hit on a minute ago? Lack of time. Huge challenge to our society, I think. And volunteerism is right at the heart of what can be done about it. I guess we just have to live with the reality of this new world, where there aren't that many people who can do that much.
I think that the government needs to encourage businesses to make it happen. I don't know what form that would take, but I think that just like you were relating your experience with Nixon and the Ford Motor Company, when somebody says, here's what we think we ought to do, like this initiative that George Bush has come up with faith-based organizations.
Yes, right.
That's a terrific idea, because these people are doing some things in the community that nobody knows about.
Right.
I know about them because I work with them.
Sure.
I mean, we did things with faith-based organizations that got high school students their first jobs in the summer when they were between semesters, and they do an awful lot in the community and need to be supported. So I think that the government can say, rather than take tax dollars to do this, let's give people a tax break. Right? If you'll do this, we'll do this. Now there's some of that now. You can deduct your mileage and any expenses that you have, you can deduct, but that's not a big enough carrot to get people to do it. You need a bigger inducement than that. You need to get some kind of a tax credit or something. I mean, just like I mentioned earlier, that the ARCO Foundation provided funding to an organization, and I think it was up to like $1,000. Say to you, if you whatever you want to do, we'll give you $1,000 if you go out and do that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll give you a tax credit. If you can get a letter from an organization say that you give 100 hours a year, whatever the number is. I know I didn't have a plan about this, but and the president said, well, the president says from the bully pulpit, here's what I want you to do, or here's what I want the corporations to do. But that goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. I just want to be sure we're not running out of the tape. For some reason, I can't see the end of the tape. I guess it's still running anyway.
I don't know if that's certainly not the only answer, but I think that would go a long way to alleviate the shortage. I mean, it's kind of a forced voluntarism, but I think you need an incentive today.
Yes, you
that
do.
maybe didn't exist at some point in the past.
Mm-hmm. A way of coming to grips with the new reality that we're faced with as times change. The one thing that doesn't change is change. Chloe, I told you she personally is responsible for guarding the house.
She saw me drive up.
She regards that street as her street. And if somebody comes along, I try to explain to her, Chloe, that car is being driven, I'm sure, by a taxpayer. He's entitled to drive on that street. You may think it's your street, but it's really a public thoroughfare, Chloe. She's a character. Guys, you have such wonderful insights, and I think one of the important contributions you've made in this interview is to address the role of the business community and the corporation and what they can do. That's just great. Just before we wrap up here, how do you see the current situation in the Volunteer Center of Los Angeles? Is it going to continue doing these same things?
Oh, I think it's a strong organization. They now have about 100 employees.
Yeah.
They have a stable financial base because they are supported by the Assistance League of Southern California, which is a very, very...
Assistance League? I see. I am, after 3 years here, I'm still getting acquainted with the Los Angeles community, so there's an awful lot of stuff I don't know about.
Well, the Assistance League is made up of, it was begun by wives of wealthy entertainment industry people. And they did good things for the community. They fed the poor, but it grew to now where they have daycare, they have counseling sessions, they run this volunteer center. But they're all separate programs. So the volunteer center has its own director, and they do the same programs that we did. But now there's no duplication of effort. I mean, everybody's got it's an organization. And Orange County, the director of the volunteer center of Greater Orange County, got all the volunteer centers in Orange County together and made one organization. And it certainly made things a lot simpler.
So there were a number of separately organized volunteer centers by
Yes.
individual communities in the county.
Yeah, that's one of the things that the Points of Light Foundation struggles with is what standards are there for a volunteer center.
Yes.
And up until now there are.
Yes.
One of the things that we did at our conventions was to put together some standards as to what a volunteer had to do before it could be called a volunteer center.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not franchised like it ought to be. I mean, it's like somebody says if you use the name volunteer center of,
Yes.
then you have to meet these standards.
Sure.
And it's coming. It's coming. Part of the problem is that a lot of organizations that do volunteer work, like Volunteer Center of Los Angeles, and they call themselves something else
Right. Right.
that doesn't have the word volunteer in it.
I know there's a diversity of nomenclature.
And if you try to change the name, it's like stirring up a storm because they want it that way, and that's the way it's going to be. So.
I can imagine. Yeah. Walter, are there other observations that occur to you that deserve to be recorded for all time?
Well, I think that volunteer centers need the guidance of knowledgeable community people. And one of the problems that all boards have, to my knowledge anyway, is that you get community people who sit on a board because they think it's a prestigious thing to do and don't contribute anything. And you don't get the right people.
Yep.
You get people who are not knowledgeable about finances. And that's how the organization gets in trouble, because the director comes in, or the controller, whoever it is, and here's the books. And people don't know what they're looking at. They don't know how to read a financial statement. And all of a sudden they're in trouble, and they wonder how they got in trouble, because they weren't the right people. And that is a difficulty, and I would like to see people, when they come on a board, be educated. One of the things I tried to do was have a CPA come in and say, here's what you got to be looking for. When you're looking for problems, here's what you got to be looking for. On a Saturday, whole board in. Here's what you got to do. And I think that more corporate people ought to be involved in these things, and they're not. It sort of started up in the 80s, and then now I think it's coming back down again, and it's a shame, because even with your experiences, I mean, you provided a valuable, extremely valuable service in setting up that organization that today is much, much stronger, and an organization that might not have existed if you hadn't gotten involved.
I'm so encouraged to hear you're bringing me up to date on how the Centers of Light took over and is continuing and doing the job it's doing. I had really lost touch with that.
They're underfunded though.
Yeah,
They need more funding.
yeah. What is the basic funding? Corporate contributions or what for the Once a Life?
Corporate contributions as well as monies that come to from the Corporation for National Service, which I guess is direct funding from Congress.
Ah, really?
But the thing that the corporation doesn't give as much money as they give to some of their other projects.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Walter, I think this has been extremely valuable. And
Well, I thank you for the opportunity.
we thank you for taking the time to come to this interview. And the tape will be turned over to it's housed, actually, the archives are housed down at the USC School of Social Work. There's a special unit there.
In the library there?
Yes, I think it's in the library there. Yeah, that's right.
Well, hopefully somebody will listen to it.
And well, they have a way of using these. I certainly hope so, because I think you've made some very significant observations from your experience, and this should be a very valuable addition to the archives. Thank you so much.
Well,